All right, what I want to talk to you about, I think we're going connecting to the heart of God. I'll get into it in this way. There's a study that the University of Virginia did back in 2014 involving mostly college students. All right, and there were two rules when you came into this mostly empty room. They said you can't fall asleep and you can't get out of your chair. There's only two rules. And then they were asked to sit in a chair and think in silence for 30 minutes. But before they did that, there's this little ankle bracelet, I guess what you call it, that they would put on their ankle, and they gave themselves an electrical shock. Okay, and this is before they even went in there, and they were asked to rate the pain. They said it was probably like a 5. Like it hurt enough that they would pay to avoid that pain. That's how much it hurt. Okay. And then they sat there in the empty room for 30 minutes. And here's what the researchers found. 12 of 18 men in the study gave themselves at least one electric shock during the 15-minute thinking period. Only 6 of the 24 females shocked themselves. So everyone who had received the shock before going in this room said they would pay to avoid that. But 18 of them, after simply being alone with their own thoughts for 15 minutes, apparently said they'd rather administer electrical shock than to sit there and think. One guy shocked himself 180 times. So, but I just want you to think about that when forced to sit alone with thoughts and feelings, that most of us would rather shock ourselves and administer pain than to kind of even feel what is going on with me. And my unprofessional opinion, right, I'm just a campus minister, is that ultimately that's because if you're like me, we're scared of our emotions and really we have boatloads of shame. And when we have to sit to ourselves and we have to think about ourselves, there's a lot of shame. And I'd rather have pain than that. And so what I want to kind of walk through, hopefully, together, I'm working on this with you all, is that anytime that we begin to sit alone and we feel the tragedy of this world and the darkness of our heart, I'm just convinced that what's behind that and why that's so scary is that we really fear, well, let's put it this way, we're not sure what the heart of God is like. That whatever kind of comes welling up in me, I'm not really sure that Jesus is going to draw near to that. And so when we talk about, being in tune with the heart of God, we have to ask, well, what is the heart of God like? What really is it like? And here's what's interesting, right? The heart of God is most clearly revealed in the person of Jesus. The heart of God takes on human flesh and walks this earth, right? He says, when you see me, you see the Father. Well, in all 4 of the Gospels and 80-something chapters, there's only one verse where Jesus describes what his heart is like. Just one. So there's this one verse where Jesus gives you a window into the heart of God. And do you know what he says? It's Matthew 11. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, learn from me. And he says this, for I am gentle and lowly at heart. That the one time that Jesus speaks about the heart of God, he doesn't say, come to me for I'm tough at heart. Come to me because I'm, distant and wrathful at heart. The manliest, man to ever live, Jesus himself, said that I'm gentle and lowly at heart. Gentle meaning humble, tender, arms open. Lowly meaning access, like he was accessible. Everybody felt like they could be around him. So, here's my premise tonight before we're going to read Psalm 51. What if the awful thing we all have called shame, what if shame could actually lead me to vulnerability, to where there's real connection with a God who is gentle and lowly and actually brings real connection with other people? That Jesus actually meets us in our shame. So let me pray for us, and then I'm going to read Psalm 51. Lord, thank you for your word. Even having it before us is such a kindness. It means that you want to be known. it means that you're near to us. And so I pray that you'd be gentle and lowly with us tonight as, I don't know, maybe you unveil some things that are hard for us to see, but more than anything, would you unveil the beauty of Jesus and draw us near? In your son's name I pray, amen. All right, here's Psalm 51. To the choir master, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise, for you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in right sacrifices and burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings, and the bulls will be offered on your altar. All right. So just thinking about, yes, emotions, but mainly shame. We're going to see the context of shame, and then we're going to talk about the battle of shame, and then hopefully we'll see the healing of it. Context of shame. This is one of those Psalms that it tells you the actual specific scenario for which David wrote this, right? It says, a Psalm of David when Nathan the prophet went to him after he'd gone into Bathsheba. And the context is so important because understanding what's behind this will help us understand what shame is. Right? These are events you can read about in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, but the summary is this. David's king of Israel. There's battles going on kind of on the edge of Israel, and David probably should be out fighting. Instead, he's back at his palace. He goes up on his roof, and he sees one of his best friend Uriah, his wife Bathsheba, bathing. He uses his power, abuses his power to get her, fornicates with her. She becomes pregnant. So however many weeks that takes to find that out, he gets told she's pregnant. Here's what happens. Shame. Because at that moment, there's a fear that he's going to be seen. That what I've done is going to be discovered, and now people are going to think differently of it. So he concocts a plan. He brings Uriah back from war, gets Uriah drunk, so that hopefully he'll go sleep with Bathsheba, and therefore his shame will be covered, right? It'll look like his baby. That doesn't work, and so he ends up basically calling his generals, concocting a plan to have Uriah killed on the battlefield. Uriah dies, and then he marries Bathsheba. Why? Shame. Hoping that no one will see who he really is. Hoping no one will see what he's done. Because shame is it's that fear of being seen. And so he sits with adultery and murder. Most people estimate for at least 8 months, maybe 10 months. Until Nathan, the prophet and a friend, shows up and exposes him really in this brilliant way. And he writes Psalm 51. So Psalm 51 is this prayer, this song that's written from a place where his shame has finally been exposed and he started crying out for healing. And David, I think he's inviting all of us to follow him. So what is shame? Dan Allender, I was talking about Dan Allender with a former student. Dan Allender calls it the traumatic exposure of nakedness. It's that deep, deep feeling that if you were to see me for who I really am, or certain parts of me, if you knew everything about it, you would not want to connect with me. You would not want to be my friend. You would probably laugh at me. You'd at least be sarcastic, and you'd reject me. that gap between who I think I should be, what I want others to perceive me as, and who I really am, that gap is shame, that feeling. And so once you start thinking about that, you're like, man, gosh, this is all in me. But that means shame can look like a guy I knew, a former intern of mine who always frees me to tell the story. He was in a hurry mowing his yard in 9th grade, and in a thoughtless moment, he reached in to unclog it, but forgot to let go of the blade, sliced 2 of his fingers, ended up going to the emergency room, was in his bed that night, his 8th grade, and he said he started weeping. I was like, man, I bet that hurt. And he said, no. He said, pain pills are awesome. I didn't feel anything. But he said he started weeping because he thought about going to school the next day. And he knew that his friends would laugh. He knew that because of how dumb this was. And he said the pain of how people would laugh at me in school was greater than what I experienced in my hand. That feeling is shame. Shame can look like the guy who was an alcoholic in college, becomes a Christian, and his life gets cleaned up, and now he's married in his late 30s with 2 kids, and the relapse begins, and he thinks, who can I turn to? Nobody can see this. That feeling is shame, right? Shame can look like the CEO of a company whose bottom line doesn't look that good this year. He's running out of ideas of how to save the company, and he feels like he can't ask for help because everybody's counting on him. Who can I go to? That's shame. Shame can be that feeling of walking into your home on a weeknight on Friday night from another day of just grinding it at work. Your kids don't even look up from their screens. Your wife is clearly frustrated as she tries to close this kitchen cabinet that you were supposed to work on for weeks and still haven't fixed. And you just deep down wish she desired you. And you sit down on the couch and you think, like, I'm a joke. Like even my family just tolerates me. But when your buddies ask you at church, how are things? You say, they're going great. That is shame. And one of the reasons that abuse is so heartbreaking, so we're kind of diving in, is because you feel shame for something that was done to you, and it wasn't even your fault. You're, in some ways, someone that was supposed to care for you took advantage of you. Now you feel shame, and it wasn't even your fault. This is why when sin enters the world in Genesis 3, nakedness is always a symbol of shame. That if you see me to my core, you will not want to be my friend. You'll laugh at me. So Brene Brown, the world's leading researcher in shame, says shame's the fear of being unlovable. Dan Allender says it's that self-contempt moment when you say I'm an idiot. Kurt Thompson says shame is that deep belief that something is wrong with me and others can see it. However you're going to define it, that's what shame feels like. That's the context of this song. So then what happens in our hearts as we battle this? Well, this is interesting, right? How did King David, for let's say 10 months, granted they wouldn't use this term, but David's a Christian at this point. David's probably a better Christian than me or you. I've never written a book of the Bible. And he's sitting in this for 10 months. How did he do that? Well, he did what we all do. He hid his shame, and he tried to cover it, right? If you look at verse 16, now that he's begun to come out of his shame, he says something that sounds really weird. He says, for you will not delight in sacrifices, or I would give it. You'll not be pleased with a burnt offering. That sounds so strange. Why would God not be pleased with something he commanded and that's religious activity? And David tells you, because he says the sacrifices that please God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. It's the same thing he confesses in verse 6 where he admits the Lord delights in truth in his inward being. So here's what David's admitting. He's admitting that for whatever those 6 to 10 months that he's sitting in shame, he's admitting he wasn't being honest. If you had followed around King David and his kingdom, outwardly, he looked fine. He was offering sacrifices. He was doing his kingly duties. But inwardly, it was a sham. Inwardly, he was hiding. David didn't want people to see what he had actually done. And he honestly didn't want God to see it either. And so he did the age-old story that we all do. He hid. And he hid behind religious activity and staying busy. Because if people see this religious activity and staying busy, then no one will see what I'm afraid of people seeing. And this strategy is still alive today, right? We can cover our shame with look, as long as people see me using that kind of right Christian lingo or involved in the church, people will see that, and they won't see me. They won't see the things I'm ashamed about. They won't see how my family really is, and you won't reject me. And at least in my 12 years of campus ministry, I'll tell you how the religious covering of shame usually comes out. It comes out in anger and judgmentalism towards others. This actually happens with David. If you go read the account, Nathan comes and approaches David and tells him a story about some sheep that have been stolen by a rich man. And David gets so incensed with anger. He says, that man should be killed. Why is he so angry? It's because he's covering shame. And there's something about if I can show anger at other people's sins, then if I'm that angry at that, I must not be struggling with it either. That's how it usually comes out. So I'll tell you a secret, at least in college and campus ministry. When I meet with a student that is extremely angry and judgmental towards others, I'm always thinking, man, I wonder what skeletons are in his closet. There's something that's being covered. We can cover our shame by perfecting one area of our life so that you just see that and you don't see anything else. Right? My kids will be perfect, so you'll see them, and you won't ask any other questions. I'll perfect the profession, the work that I'm good at. I'll cover by perfecting the body and doing CrossFit 4 times a week or whatever. You see that, and actually instead of seeing my shame. Or even if the mirror is a place of shame, I'll just kind of make jokes about how it looks so that you think I don't care, and you'll see that instead of shame. Whatever it can do to make it feel like I can disappear. I think a lot of times we just kind of do it with this cool persona of overconfidence that lives in shallow relationships with people. As long as I can be the kind of person that navigates in and out of conversation with everybody and always having fun and always making jokes, it's cover. Because all my relationships are shallow. Nobody really knows my story. Nobody really knows how I'm hurting. But everybody thinks I'm fine. Whatever can make me feel like I'm disappearing so that you don't have to reject the real me, that's the covering. That's what David did. And Satan and shame always whisper this: if people knew the real you, they would scorn you. So you better isolate. And so if I don't cover, here's my other option besides the healing. Because the fear of being seen is so strong, if I don't cover it, I will numb it. This is what Brené Brown, world's leading researcher in shame, this is what she talks about, that I will just numb the feeling of shame. And there's 1,000 ways that we do this as men. I can numb by being busy. If I can stay engaged with activity from the moment I wake up until I collapse and fill that in with Netflix and my phone, or then I finally get in bed and I just don't even have the energy to reflect. And it just numbs it. I can numb by creating fantasy worlds that I live in because I like who I am in the fantasy world better than who I am in real life. I mean, this happens a lot for college students right now, that rather than being in a conversation with the real me, I'd rather sit behind a screen and Snapchat or Instagram or create this digital persona that I can always respond with the perfect joke so that I never have to mess up, right? Because that fantasy world is easier than the real world. Pornography is a numbing agent, right? If no one wants the real me, if I fear that, then I can create a fantasy world where the person on the screen desires me. And that numbs the shame. Alcohol, substances, those are numbing agents, right? If being in social scenes or whatever it is makes me feel exposed, I'll be seen, then I'm just going to numb that feeling. And here's what Brené Brown says. And I'll show you, I think David even talks about this. It's impossible to isolate what you numb. If I numb shame, I also numb joy, I numb gratitude. I numb sadness. I numb all the things that it takes to actually live in this world, loving God and loving people. And isn't it interesting that when David cries out in verse 8, he has to cry out, "Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice." David's admitting that what he's done and the way that he's handled the shame, it's affected his joy. His actual physical being, it's gone. It's degrading him. And so here's why the spiral happens in us when we do this. Because whether it's hiding and isolating or whether it's numbing, even if I'm around other people, the strategy is ultimately isolating myself from people. It's self-sufficiency. I'll figure out how to fix this. And the trick that shame always pulls on you in isolation is shame, it's like a petri dish. In isolation, shame always grows. So if I keep trying to handle shame and self-sufficiency, it just begets more and more shame, right? So if home is really a hard place for me to be, so I end up at, the hunting camp this weekend, and I kind of stay longer than I planned. So then I feel bad about that. I feel guilty because I've been away from the family, and then I go home, and now I feel guilty about that, and I realize that home's hard. Well, guess what place feels good? The hunting camp. So I go back to it, and then the spiral continues. And I can't get out. And so shame actually corrupts and makes me turn from God and others and inward. But the way of healing from shame, it's never going to come from isolation. It's always going to come from connection, from being seen and actually loved and actually cared for. And this is where David becomes our guide. Look how the shame gets healed. He turns to God. And I'm going to show you he actually turns to other people. So there's a great book on shame called Unwanted by Jay Stringer. But Jay Stringer talks about this. He said he was watching the show one time where they interviewed these people from Discovery Shark Week. And he said he was interviewing one of the cameramen. He's like, "Man, what's it like being in there with all the sharks? And do you ever get scared?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course I get scared." But he said, "Here's the truth about sharks." He said, "If you have a big camera, if you see a shark coming at you," he said, "the key is to swim straight at them." He said, "If you swim straight at a shark, though it looks scary and terrifying, they're not used to anything swimming at them, that they actually get scared and they'll avoid you. Because they're always used to things running away, swimming away, and so they attack." And Stringer turns around and says, that is actually how healing from shame works. It's completely counterintuitive. Everything in us about shame makes us want to run away. But you have to go straight at it. You have to go straight at it to Jesus and to other people, and you'll find it loses its power. And this is what David does. Instead of staying isolated from God, think about that moment. When Nathan exposes him, David still had the power. He could have killed him. David could have still hid and made excuses. But instead, he finally cries out to the Lord, and he lets himself be seen by God. He cries out in nakedness for his mercy. You read it. He makes no appeals about himself. He takes on the posture of utter vulnerability, and he just starts requesting. Look at it. He says, "Have mercy, O God, according to your steadfast love. Blot out my transgressions, Lord. Wash me, Lord. Cleanse me, purge me, create in me a clean heart, restore to me." He's just saying, I've got nothing to offer. I've been hiding, I've been covering, I've been numbing. I'm still trying to prove myself, but all those strategies, all they're doing is isolating me. And so the only way out is actually to seek connection with the Lord, and we'll see the other part. But he's just saying, I can't manipulate you anymore. If you're going to receive me, Lord, if you're going to do something, it's going to have to be, you're going to have to cleanse me. You're going to have to create in me a new heart. You're going to have to make it happen. You have to wash, you have to cleanse. And here's what David's doing. He's encountering the only thing that's scarier than shame. You know what it is? It's grace. Grace is scarier than shame because you give up complete control. It's utter vulnerability. You let go of all self-sufficiency and you put yourself in the hands of God. It's just a broken and contrite heart. And all you're doing is banking on God's character. So here comes the question, how do you know that you can bank on God's character? That's a scary thing. There's an old Spanish story that I hope is true because it's at least a good one. So I hope you know, Jason does this all the time. Preachers tell all kinds of stories that we act like we know are true that actually might be lies, okay? But because they're good illustrations, we use them. So Jason does it too. So here's the story that there was early 20th century, this son named Paco runs away from his dad in Madrid because what the son had done, they were estranged, and the dad had searched for his son for months for no avail. And finally, kind of in the last desperate attempt, the father puts an ad in the Madrid newspaper. And the ad simply reads this. It says, "Dear Paco, meet me in front of this newspaper office at noon on Saturday. All is forgiven." Ad goes out, all over Madrid. That Sunday, 800 Pacos show up at the newspaper office, looking for a love from a father who would forgive. Like, think about that, if that's true. There are 800 Pacos sitting in Spain, sitting in shame, hiding from the one that they knew they needed. They just couldn't they couldn't come back until the dad made the first move. And when the dad made the first move, they came home. Here's what you need to know. Here's what I need to know when we feel shame. God's made the first move. He's done it. Because long after this psalm is written, there will be a child, interesting enough, that descends from Bathsheba. Kind of interesting. David had tons of wives. But it's through David's worst moment of his life. His name's going to be Jesus. And God's going to take on flesh, and he's going to walk this earth. And Jesus never had anything to be ashamed about. He's the only person that ever walked this earth that the idea of who I'm supposed to be and who I actually am, he always met that. There was no gap. He had nothing to hide. Yet it's really interesting. Because when you get to the end of his life, right, there's 4 Gospels. They give kind of different details, especially if you go look at his death. People are telling different parts of it. But every gospel writer tells you one detail. You know what it is? That Jesus is crucified naked. They all want you to know that. It's really interesting. They want you to know that when the Son of God came, he stripped completely naked. And you know what happens? People mock him. People laugh at him. As Jesus is seen by everyone on a cross, you know what happens? He's a symbol of shame, and he cannot cover himself. He can't. He's literally splayed open. And then, it's very interesting, they offer him a numbing agent, right? Sour wine. And he rejects it. He says, I will not numb it. I'm going to die this out. And he bears shame, fully entrusting himself to the care of his Father. And you look at that and you say, but that man has nothing to be ashamed of. What's happening? Because he's bearing my shame, and he's bearing your shame. All the stuff in your life that you don't want people to see, Jesus is covered in it. He takes on, if we're using connection, disconnection from people, but ultimately from God himself as he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's utterly isolated and laughed at and scorned. See, he made the first move. He's saying, I've borne your shame. Come home. Come as you are. So then Hebrews 12, they tell you he endured the cross and despised the shame. Which means when you turn to God with a broken and contrite heart, here's what you'll find. There's no shame. No, his heart is gentle and lowly. So tender, open arms, so accessible that he walks into our shame and receives it and takes it upon himself. He doesn't cast you away. He doesn't shame you. It's gone. He doesn't make you feel dirty. You're clean. I really want you to get this. Shame will never, ever be healed by yourself. It's only through the cleansing and accepting that comes through Jesus. We actually have to unveil ourselves to Jesus and be completely dependent on his mercy. And you'll find, here's his mate, you'll find he's not ashamed of you. Isn't that what Hebrews says? He's not ashamed to call you his brother. He loves and delights in you. I don't know if any of you remember the old Robin Williams movie, Fisher King. It's like early 90s. He plays this a little bit mentally ill homeless person. And of course, Robin Williams, he does it brilliantly. And there's this woman that he's obsessed with, that he's always watching at work. And so finally, through the story, he gets up the nerve to ask her on this date, and they have a date, and they're walking back towards her apartment. And this girl, in her history, she has no confidence. She's really bitter towards men. And as Robin Williams is about to drop her off at her front door, she stops him and she says, "This is over. This isn't going any farther." She says, "This is what's going to happen. You'll come into my house. We'll have a couple of drinks. You'll sleep over. I'll wake up in the morning, but you'll be distant. You'll stay for breakfast, and I'm going to go to work feeling so good, thinking that you love me, but you won't call me, and then I'll go into a slow descent to where I feel like I'm nothing more than a piece of dirt. And I just don't ever want to do that again. I don't even know why I'm putting myself through this date again." And the whole time she's going through that explanation, Robin Williams just gets this pained look on his face. And he looks at her and he says, "I've got a confession for you. I'm in love with you. I actually want to love you forever." And she looks at him like, strange. He goes, "No, listen. I already know you. I know that you hate your job. I know you don't have many friends. I know that you take 2 tries to get out of your car every afternoon at lunch. I know that you feel awkward, uncoordinated, and you don't feel like you're beautiful. I know what you eat for lunch every day. I know that you grab a jawbreaker before you go back to the office every day. I know the path you take home. I already know you, and I love you." Now, that'd be creepy in real life in some ways, right? But the metaphor is this: I know everything about you, and I'm here, and I love you. And it's actually a beautiful picture of some healing from shame. Because all these things that she was embarrassed about, somebody already knew and moved towards her. This is what David does. We go straight at our shame, like the shark. Take it to Jesus, and you will find he already knew that about you. Anything that you're discovering and unveiling, he already knew. And he loves you. And he delights in you. Yeah, he knows you're addicted to substances. He knows you're addicted to X, Y, Z, and he loves you. And what David is offering to me and to you is that through Jesus, whether it's the first time or the 1,000th time, when you turn to him, you'll discover he sees you. And there's no condemnation in his eyes. There's love and delight. Because you're the very reason it came. Jesus did not come and die and resurrect for people that he's ashamed of. He didn't. He came and died and resurrected for people that he wants to be with. And that's me and you. And secondly, I'll just end here. Shame is healed not in isolation, but in connection. Yes, first and foremost to Jesus, the eyes that only really matter, but also to each other. See, in verse 13, David says, after you've cleansed me and removed my shame, he says, "I will teach others your way." I will not just go to you, Lord. I'm going to share my story with other people. Now, what's interesting is the most shame-filled moment of David's life, now for thousands upon thousands of years, has been read by literally millions of people to help them begin to heal from their shame to trust Jesus. And here's kind of the other truth. Is I actually have to experience being seen and known and like flesh and blood of people around me. One of my friends who's a pastor in Tulsa, he tells about a man in his church who had a hidden life, 2 affairs that nobody knew about, and finally it was starting to come out. And he said the moment that actually changed him is when he went before the elders and he just started confessing everything that he had done. And he says he confessed everything that he'd done. He was just bracing because he was ready to be yelled at. He was ready to be kind of treated with coldness. But instead, the elders got up, prayed, and hugged him. And he said it was the first time he ever believed that Jesus wasn't ashamed of him. And it became the turning moment in his life. Look, not everybody needs to write a book about their shame that the whole world reads, okay? Like, this is the anointed King David. But there needs to be somebody. There needs to, like, somehow we got to swim at the shark, and you need to invite either a trusted friend into your shame, invite an older person, a counselor, someone to experience connection that will push back the lie of shame. And I think Billy said y'all are actually starting small groups. I don't know. In a small group. And again, it doesn't have to be like level 10 shame where you're laying out the biggest stuff, but you're starting to say stuff. Starting to let the real you be seen. Because here's what they're actually discovering in kind of an addiction study. I'm going to land the plane. They're doing this in lab rats. What they're finding is that we should stop calling it addiction, and we should start calling it bonding. Because what they're saying is that when we start being addicted to substances, it's like a bonding. And what they're learning is that the opposite of alcoholism is not sobriety. The opposite of alcoholism is human connection. That's the healing. And so when someone actually to a friend or to a small group says, you know, I'm not doing that well right now. Like, sure, work is fine, but I find myself not really wanting to go home because it's too chaotic there. And I struggle to understand my 13-year-old daughter. And I feel like I'm walking on eggshells with my wife. Would y'all pray for me? Like, that actually begins to do something. Or if you say, guys, I'll be honest, I'm confused and beat down. I know there's like history of racism in our country and our city, and I know if I'm going to call myself a Christian, I've been told I got to care about this, but honestly, I don't even know where it starts. I don't even know what that looks like. And I feel like it's just one more thing I got to do as a Christian, and I can't even keep the trains moving at my house. I don't care. And you actually verbalize that, and you invite somebody into that, you know what's going to begin to happen? You'll see other people see the real you, and other people care for you. And what you'll begin to find that all of you together, Faith Pres, starts resembling the heart of God. You start becoming gentle and lowly with each other. And guess what? Yes, you're powerful. You have the Holy Spirit in you. But your power starts becoming the power of our Savior. It starts bending down to meet others, to give access to others. Tender. So that's kind of my final vision. What if Faith Pres became a place where shame was removed, not put on? What if it was a place where you could come in broken and messy and find not scorn, not comparison? Yeah, I get that. I think that would actually be a healing movement in Birmingham. Maybe, I don't know. But that's an invitation. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for Psalm 51, just giving us a window into David's heart of a place of deep, deep shame and showing us what is really hard to believe. The places that we don't even like about ourselves, you'll walk into and you'll clean, and you'll treat us with tender and gentle and lowly care. So would you help us to turn to you for the first time or the 1,000th time and to see that you've made the first move, and we can trust you. In your Son's name I pray. Amen.